No, not that room. It was the kind of sentence that never needed repeating. In the last days of 2005, with the Norfolk air pressed cold against the windows at Sandringham, the message moved quietly through the house before the Queen ever appeared in a doorway. A decorator's book had been opened. A fabric sample had been laid across the end of a bed. Someone had said the room could be lightened, refreshed, made more practical. Then the answer came back, flat and unmistakable. Not that room. And years later, people remembered it not because anyone shouted, but because no one did. What mattered was not wallpaper. It never is in houses like that. What mattered was timing. 8 months earlier, Charles had married Camilla in a civil ceremony at Windsor. After years of scandal, years of public hostility, years in which Diana's name had never really stopped being the one people said first. Even the settlement around Camilla had been careful. Duchess of Cornwall, not Princess of Wales. A wife, yes, but not in the space Diana had left behind, not in the imagination of the country, not yet. By Christmas, that tension had followed everyone to Sandringham. Camilla had joined the royal walk to church there for the first time that year, smiling beside Charles while cameras clicked in the winter light. From a distance, it looked settled. That was the point of those walks, the family in formation, the coat, the gloves, the measured pace. But houses do not move at the speed of photographs. Inside, old arrangements remained where the public could not see them, and the staff knew the difference between a room that was empty and a room that was merely waiting. People later called it Diana's room, though palace names are often half memory and half habit. It was one of those bedrooms long associated with her visits, preserved in tone if not officially by decree. Pale colours, familiar placement, a dressing table left in a way older members of staff recognised. In another family it might have meant nothing. In this one, with this history, it meant everything. A room could become shorthand for who had once mattered there, and for how dangerous it could be to seem too eager to replace them. Camilla was not foolish. That was never her weakness. If anything, she was usually too practical to waste emotion on symbols, which was why the moment landed the way it did. She had been trying in those years to make a life that felt less borrowed. New routines, new cupboards, rooms adjusted to the shape of the people actually living in them. Anyone else might have called that normal. In a palace, normal becomes political the second it touches memory. The story, as it has come down, is small. A glance around the room, a comment about changing the curtains, perhaps moving furniture, perhaps repainting. Not a purge, not some theatrical declaration. That would have been easier in a way, easier to condemn, harder to understand. No, this was quieter than that. The sort of suggestion made by someone tired of entering spaces that still felt as though they belonged emotionally to someone else. The sort of suggestion that can sound harmless until everyone in earshot goes still. And they did go still. A footman holding the door too long. A housekeeper answering a fraction too carefully. A tray of tea cooling untouched while no one quite decided what to say next. That was how these houses registered danger, not with noise, but with a pause. Someone looked down at the carpet. Someone else straightened a cushion that did not need straightening. Because by then, everyone around Charles understood the strange arithmetic of his second marriage. Camilla could be present, necessary, even accepted in the private machinery of daily life. But the emotional debt to Diana was still unpaid, and every corridor seemed to know it. If you followed this family for years, you already know that the real arguments were rarely the loud ones. They happened in pauses, in seating plans, in who waited for whom, in which names were spoken naturally and which were spoken only after a breath. So stay with this one, because the room was only the surface. Underneath it was the older question the monarchy never solved cleanly. How do you move forward when the person left behind still occupies more space in memory than the people living in the house? That question had been there from the beginning. Diana herself had known what it was to enter royal rooms and feel she was walking into someone else's order. Before the wedding in 1981, she stayed at Clarence House and later described it as feeling more like a hotel than a home. She had learned early that royal houses could receive you perfectly and still make you feel unclaimed. Years later, at Kensington Palace, she would make rooms softer, brighter, more human, turning official space into something that could hold children, laughter, disorder, feeling. She understood the power of arrangement because she had once been wounded by it. Maybe that was why, even after the divorce, and even after 1997, Diana stayed in those places differently from other absent people. Not as a portrait on a wall, as a standard, as a comparison no one had requested and no one could avoid. William and Harry had grown up in rooms shaped by her taste, her touch, her version of warmth inside an institution built for formality. By the winter of 2005, they were young men, not boys, but they were still her sons. And everyone knew there were some changes that would look to them, and to the country, less like decorating than erasure. Charles, in stories like this, is often imagined speaking first. Usually he didn't. He had long practice in waiting to see where resistance would come from. He knew his mother, he knew the public. He knew too that even after marrying Camilla, he was asking the country to accept something it had spent years refusing. So if the request reached him at all, it likely meant the same thing many difficult truths met in Charles. A silence, a hand half raised to his face, a long look at nothing in particular. He would have understood the room was not really about furniture. He already knew. By then, the Queen understood it best of all. People sometimes mistake her restraint for distance. It was more disciplined than that. She knew which symbolic battles could be ignored and which could not. A changed room in an ordinary family was nothing. A changed room attached, however loosely, to Diana in late 2005 was an invitation to headlines, resentment, and old grief returning in a new shape. The monarchy had only just managed the marriage. It was not ready to survive the appearance of replacement. So whether the Queen said it herself, or through one of those calm channels that made her authority feel almost impersonal, the instruction was clear. Leave it, not now. And, in the version that endured because it sounded exactly like the sort of truth she would protect, there was one line beneath it, quieter than anger and stronger than it. Some rooms are not empty just because the person has gone. That was the line people kept. Not because it was sentimental. The Queen was not sentimental in public and rarely allowed herself the luxury in private, but because it recognized the problem precisely. Diana had been dead 8 years. She was also still present, in the newspapers, in charity memory, in the faces of her sons, in the way crowds still responded whenever her name rose unexpectedly. You could not govern that by pretending it had ended, and you certainly could not outmaneuver it with new curtains. Camilla, to her credit or to her frustration, is said to have stopped there. No scene, no visible offence, just that contained withdrawal people in her world learn early. The mouth set slightly, the shoulders held steady, the catalogue closed without comment. She had spent decades surviving disapproval. One more invisible boundary would not break her. But something shifted all the same. Not in the tabloids that morning, not on the church walk, inside the house, in the private understanding that there were still places where her authority ended before it began. And outside, of course, the picture remained smooth. That was always the contrast with this family. Publicly, Sandringham kept its rhythm. Church bells, gravel under shoes, hands raised to the crowd, Camilla beside Charles, William and Harry nearby, the Queen carried into view by tradition itself. If you saw only that, you might have thought the hard part was over. If you remember that winter, tell me in the comments what you think the country was really looking at. Acceptance, performance, or something uneasy in between. Inside the house, the consequence of the moment was smaller and therefore more real. Fewer assumptions, more caution about what could be touched, staff becoming alert to language. No one calling anything an update when restoration would do. No one using Diana's name too loosely, and no one forgetting it either. That is how protocol hardens, not always through written rules, but through one incident everyone remembers when they decide what not to risk next time. And the irony, of course, is that other rooms would change later. Palaces always change. Younger sons move out, bedrooms become offices, nurseries become dressing rooms. Even memory makes compromises with daily life. But that winter, at Sandringham, the line held. Not because Diana needed a room. She did not. Because the living still needed a place where their behaviour admitted she had not been tidied away. There is a difference between absence and removal. Most families learn it quietly. The royals had to learn it under chandeliers, with history listening from every frame on the wall. Camilla was trying to belong to the present. The Queen was protecting the fact that the present had been built on an emotional wreckage no one had fully finished with. Both things can be true. That is why the story survives. Not as scandal, really, as recognition. Late that night, after the house settled and the servants' steps had faded down the corridor, the room remained exactly as it had been that morning. The bed turned down but untouched. The chair by the window still angled toward the weak winter light. A faint smell of polish, old fabric, cold air at the edges of the sash. Somewhere farther away, a door closed softly. Somewhere below, a clock marked the hour. And in the silence that followed, the room did what certain rooms in certain families always do. It kept its place. And if stories like this, quiet, private, almost invisible but somehow more revealing than any balcony wave, are the ones you come here for, like subscribe and stay with me. Because in royal houses, the deepest struggles were rarely over the crown. They were over who was allowed to remain in the room after everyone else had moved on.